All right. Hello. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first Recreational Trails Program office hours. So we're glad you're here today, and we'll pretty much dive right in pretty soon. So today is office hours, which means that our grants team did not come to this meeting with any sort of agenda. This whole session for the next hour is intended to help answer your questions about the program, whether that is planning and design, specific materials, management questions down the road, whatever. So we are here to answer your questions. We are recording this session today, and we'll be posting the recording online afterwards for anybody who couldn't make this time slot, because we know that that's true for a lot of folks, that's the case, because schedules are always tricky. And while it seems unlikely based on the number of people registered today, if there's a point where like everybody leaves at 11:30, we will pause the recording. Marlena and I will stay on the whole time in case somebody comes back. But just in case there's a lull and everybody leaves, we'll pause the recording and then restart it as soon as somebody comes back in. Just in case if you're watching the recording later and you're like, why is there a weird 10-minute gap in there? That'll be wise because it was quiet. But we've got a good turnout today, so we will dig right in soon. So we do have a lot of folks here on the call today that are coming in, which is really great. And as I said, this session is all about you all. And so we're going to offer sort of two main ways just with this number of people to ask questions. One is that you can use the raise hand function. It should be on your toolbar, a little hand piece. And so it'll actually queue you up in order so we know who is next as that piece to do that. And so I'll call on folks if you want to unmute. Also, at any point, you can drop questions into the chat. And so we'll try to moderate between like live questions in real time and chat questions. So that's our lack of agenda for today. And with that, I'm going to open it up for the first questions. So what would you all like to know about RTP? All right, Alec, take us away.
Yeah, hi, this is Alec Jones. I'm with Lamoille County Planning Commission. We are considering an application for the planning tract of RTP. And I guess generally speaking, we're curious, would that support a scoping study, or are you only looking for, actual engineering design plans through that tract?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is the first year we have ever offered a planning track. So you're asking good and relevant questions. So for us with RTP, the planning track was intended to fulfill a need that we've heard from the community about really just the lack of planning funds for RTP projects. And we saw that as interpreted in a lot of ways. It could be engineering and designs. It could be like permitting, wetland surveys, other engineering assessments. It could also have been like community engagement. We've had projects come to RTP in the past where we're like, we want to put in a connector trail between our town and this network, but we have no idea where it's going to go and what landowners are interested in participating. And the planning grant for us was like, we saw that as an opportunity for a town to be able to invest time, or a nonprofit, to be able to invest time to do that type of work. Our biggest restrictions on the planning track is that the end product of the planning component would be ultimately like working towards a project that's eligible for RTP. So it's not like planning for playgrounds or planning for other recreation things. It's trail related planning. So with that, Alec, it would just depend on like what your scoping is for, I think would be the biggest piece.
Yeah, so we originally did a study in 2015. So we're hoping to expand on that. It's for a shared use path between Morristown and Stowe, connecting the LVRT to Stowe. So that study is obviously very old and the budget's way out of date. So we're hoping to expand on that and explore more options within state and town right-of-ways, which I'm hoping that sounds like a good option for this.
It sounds like something that would be eligible
Okay.
as a piece. So like, I encourage you to, like, if you're still thinking about it, move forward with submitting that pre-application. We'll review it in greater detail. And then just for everybody's knowledge, just so in case you're new to RTP, just to share that like I forgot to introduce myself, y'all. Hi, I'm Lauren Pyle. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Outdoor Recreation Grants Manager. I send a lot of emails about RTP. I'm joined on the call by Marlena Baker, who's our grant specialists, who's here. But our staff at FPR, we also have Joe Kill, who's on our team. We actually don't make any of the decisions about RTP at the end of the day, other than eligibility. For all of the projects, planning, cost increase, as well as standard RTP and all the host of activities that can fund. All of those projects, during this pre-application phase, we're really screening to be like, is this a fit for the program? Like, is this a feasible project? So we're going to be looking for things like, is it in the right timeline? Is it the right budget piece? Is it eligible for the program? And then we'll provide feedback as we can, just based on like previous iterations of the program and the materials provided. But then when we get to the full application phase, that's really where the big lift is in telling your story and the importance and scoring the project against the criteria. And our scoring is done by a separate review committee that is generally represents a wide range of trail expertise in our community. So we have everything usually from people who are working in trails in the municipal settings to nonprofits. We've had people who actually do like field assessments with this, grant managers. Really, it's a wide variety of folks, and every application is reviewed by multiple people and scored. And then we bring them all back together to talk about it at the end. And the ranking committee at the end of that process comes out with a ranked list. They confirm where everybody is in order, and then we just run down the list as long as we have money and fund as many as we can. And so I share that to say that like we're happy to answer questions about the eligibility, but you're like, how will it rank? We're like, that's a great question and one I can't say. But so if you're considering planning, cost increase, standard RTP, for any of those, I strongly recommend looking at what the scoring process will be and those criteria, and those are outlined in the pre-application guidance, because I think the strongest projects would be like, yes, I can make a clear case of how this particular plan, this planning project, this cost increase in our current project, or these other pieces, all of those can make the case for those different criteria. So with that, Alec, do you have any other questions at this point, or did that address them all?
I think that's all I had. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Who wants to take us and offer the next question? Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate Baxter, and I am a chair of a volunteer task force in our community. And we're partnering with other folks in the town and another task force to revitalize a local park that has been used for outdoor recreation. And we were able to get an accessible trail design to improve upon the old and neglected trails that had been there, noticing that although the space has been neglected, what people have been still using it for is walking. And how can we revitalize that space and celebrate that pedestrian use? But my main question is, it's a fairly small property. My husband builds trails for a living. Our community does not have any other formal trails besides, snowmobile and Connecticut River Paddlers Trail, those kinds of kind of larger network trails. Mm-hmm. And so this would be the first kind of pedestrian trail here in our little community. And we recognize there's not a ton of funding in the world right now, and we're kind of approaching it as a scrappy community. And I know my big question is with regards to framing what our approach to the project is right now, starting with one of those loops and how it could fit into the RTP while we are working with volunteers that are professional trail builders and who are willing to donate time to build, because I know that you can't say this is who's going to build the trail, right? So I'm just trying to navigate
For anything
how
that's
to frame
paid.
that in the right way. Okay, so
It's the contractors, right? So like if you're going to pay a trail builder to do this work, you can't be like, I already know the company. That's where you can't name it in. It's like, okay, that's what it is because we're paying them. And the reason that you're not supposed to name them, you could just say contracted trail builder, is because you need to go through full procurement process after you get the grant. So that's why you can't name them, because you're like, that's not a guarantee that you will work with your preferred trail building company on that case, or your preferred contractor, or whoever that is. But if you're like, yes, it is Sam on staff who has the expertise, and Sam is the one who's doing that, you can say that that's that, or that we have a volunteer who is, or a set of volunteers who are going to participate in that role. You can, and even for like, if you have one of the things I want to point out is the budget side of that, of like, how do you think about that? So like, you could say, yes, we have volunteers. And for that, if you are going with general unskilled labor and your organization or entity does not have a predefined volunteer rate for what that means, we've offered a rate in the pre-application guidance. And that number is the independent sector's value of volunteer time for the state of Vermont. Independent sector is an independent non-governmental organization that calculates this and tracks it state over state, year over year. So there's that rate that you can use. But for any professionals who are going to be donating their time, if their time is valued differently than that, we just need to be able to have the documentation to back up when you get down to the full application later on down the road, not at the pre-application phase, but like down the road, you will need documentation to say, how did you arrive at that number? And like, how can we credit that? And so whether that is like there's some designated staff time charts, or if you have a contractor, we've seen this before with like surveyors, right? Like somebody is a surveyor professionally and they're donating their time, that they can say like, this is my standard billable rate. And they can give you that as an hour. And they're like, I am going to give you this rate, like this is what I'm crediting for volunteer time. And we can count that because that would be their standard billable rate that they are in effect donating to the project.
Okay, that helps.
Does that help? Because it's really like the contractors that are the biggest issue about that, is like the people who you're going to pay outside of the applicant entity.
Right. We couldn't
like
name we're going to get all of our gravel from this and such gravel pit, or we're going to get our ledge pack from this place.
Yeah, you can't name that, but you can be like, I'm going to get it from a gravel company. And even if you say, like, if you look at the budget example that's in the pre-application guidance, like you can even say, like, we're going to estimate we need this many yards of gravel at this many dollars a yard. And then there's delivery fee. And how did we get this number? We based it on an estimate from this company. We often, as I've shared in the previous webinars, recommend like checking with multiple companies if it's something like supplies and materials, because like those numbers can vary. So just, and if you're like, cool, I got 3 numbers, you can either pick the middle or the high one, just so that you have that information there, because inflation happens, rather than under budgeting.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Do you have any other questions, Kate, or did that satisfy them?
I think that's it for now.
Okay. Who wants to take us away with the next one? All right, Jennifer.
Thank you. I'm Jennifer Ramstetter, and I'm down in southern Vermont and hoping to work on a project with the Green Mountain Conservancy. Last year I'm on the board there, and we purchased a 200-acre piece of forest and wetland. And there is a really important trail that runs through it that's referred to as Town Trail. And the Marlborough Nordic Ski Club uses it and grooms it for Nordic skiing, has quite the clientele there. And many, many people have used it for hiking and walking for years and years. And the Vermont River Conservancy has the conservation easement on the conserved land that we now own. And the challenge is there are a lot of wet areas on that particular trail. And so what we'd like to do is to think about the ecology and the hydrology of the area and come up with the best solutions there. The Marlborough Nordic Ski Club also wants it drier so that their grooming and skiing can be better. And we're at a point where the Marlborough Nordic Ski Club has a way that they like to do things, which is to ditch areas and heap the soil up. And that has worked for them. The Green Mountain Conservancy and Vermont River Conservancy would like to see more ecological thinking go into that. So what we would like to do is apply for a planning grant in order to contract with a trail designer who could then help us come up with a plan. We're actually sort of far along in that process of thinking about it and with all of these entities, and it's really exciting that way. I think where I'm hesitant, and I know you can't combine the planning and the implementation, and you're not likely to get both a planning and an implementation grant. But so I'm now thinking the planning is the better thing to do. And just wondering, because I think all that can take place in 2026, starting in July, and then finishing up by December. And then we could move on to the implementation phase of that in 2027. You know, in the best of all possible worlds, if we've got funded for a planning, and then next year, if there were funds, apply for the implementation. Anyway, my question after that long-winded intro is it worth saying anything about the fact that we think implementation or that planning will only take 6 months or so, and that immediately in the future we'd like to apply for funds and get it done?
It's a good question right there. And I think there's actually a couple, I don't want to answer that one quite yet, because I want to go back to something you said earlier when you were sharing the story. You're saying, I know you can't apply for planning and implementation simultaneously. That is actually an incorrect statement. You can apply for them together in one standard RTP project, but your project has to be far enough along that like the planning work that is left, which is what sounds like yours, are the final steps. It's the final stages that are there that need to happen with that. And so like, just to give you an example of things that we funded in the past, like we have funded trail construction projects that need like the final engineering design on the bridge done first. Like they know they're going to need an engineering design on the bridge, but we need to pay a designer to do that. And so like, we think it's good, the bridge is going to be this big, and that's what it is. That one is a little bit of a risk, because you're like, your bridge could end up being a lot more money, and then we don't have any more RTP at the end of the day. But another more common one is that you need to secure all permits, and people maybe haven't done their wetlands delineations yet. And then when wetlands delineations happen, then they're like, oh, actually, either we need a boardwalk or we need to do a design piece. Like, as long as the whole package is possible to implement within the roughly 18-month period that we give you from July of 26 to December of 27, you can submit them as a combined package, as one whole project. But it does have to be like those final steps. Like you have to have like a pretty good plan of what you were going to do in the first place. You're like, I think we're going to do boardwalks. That is the plan at this point. And then like, we need the final confirmation of that. We have the map. We have had projects before that come in and are like, we're going to design that, we're going to have a trail somewhere, and we're going to design it and build it in 18 months. And that's the place where we want to separate it out, to say, if we're going to design the trail somewhere and it's going to have some things in it, like, but we have no idea how we're going to manage water at this point. We have no idea how we're going to do that. Like, that should be parceled off, because the ranking committee, just knowing their expertise, is going to look at that project and say, there's no way they're going to get to implementation within that time period. Like, there are too many details to figure out, versus like, if it is the final steps, you can put it all together that way. And in fact, like, that is a piece that I forgot to mention, when Alec was asking questions about the planning grant, is that we do actually have two different funding sources that are funneling into this grant round. Our standard RTP funds are from the Federal Highway Administration as designated for RTP each year. We have roughly $500,000 in that pot. And like that pot will not fund planning alone. It won't. That is a federal requirement. And so we also, and have had for year over year, a smaller pot of $74,000 that are state dollars. It's the Vermont Recreational Trails Fund that has been awarded through the RTP process. And this year was our opportunity to really think strategically about how we use those funds to meet gaps like planning that are not eligible for regular RTP dollars. And likely our cost increases are going to come out of potentially that fund as well if there are proposals that come in that. So knowing that there are different pots of money for different pieces, and so like if you are doing the planning, like if it is that early phase, that preliminary conversation, like please go for the planning projects. Like that's why we have them. And we don't know how competitive that's going to be this year because it's the first time we've offered it. But if you're like, yeah, we're almost ready, like you can combo those up by all means.
Interesting.
So I got that part. Does that negate your later question then?
That definitely helps. It causes me to have a follow-up question, which I'll try to make quick. That is, I think we are pretty far along in our thinking about this, and the trail has been there for decades, so it's not a new trail. Two other pieces. There's another major trail that needs to be rerouted away from a wetland and away from a bobcat and porcupine denning area.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of erosion. So we know that, but we don't know exactly. We know within tens of feet where the trail is going to go, but we don't know exactly because we really need the trail designer. So, again, in part, it seems like planning, but it also seems like pretty close to being ready. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that one.
I don't at this point, but I'd recommend that you submit a pre-application.
Yes.
Because and to submit it for what you think you need, and what our team will do is review that pre-application for that eligibility, for that fit. And for everybody during the pre-application phase, like you might get a notice that like you're just set to move forward with the full application. Here's the information you need. Sometimes we might also provide feedback for you
Right.
About things of saying, like this is we're having questions about this. Like we might recommend that you build out something in a different way. If we see pieces that come up in the design assessment tool for trails as an opportunity, like those pieces, we will flag. We've had questions before of like, how focused does my map need to be? That's why we're asking for maps, is because we've realized that the ranking committees year over year, when they have a good map, they have less questions about like what's happening on the project. And so we know the types of things they're going to be looking for. And so we'll be able to say like, hey, there are questions about your map. We recommend you review the guidance again or something like that. We'll provide our goal is to provide substantive feedback when we see it to help you all be more successful in your proposals. So that is kind of our goal that way.
Mm-hmm.
So without knowing like further context of like how close are we, I would encourage you to put in that pre-application, and then we can see what we have and then offer feedback from there.
Right. And so is it possible that, for example, if I put it in as the standard track, but it was then viewed as more of a planning, could it be shuttled to that possibly?
Okay. Oh, 100%. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we can swap between the pre-application and the full application. Lots of things can change for everyone. Like we can realize like, oh, we thought this was just a planning track, and then you're like, actually, we have a standard component to add. We can do that because like we're going to actually implement this because we're farther along. We had something else come into place in the next 2 months. Or vice versa, where you're like, we think it's a standard track, and we're like, we really recommend you parcel this out and maybe just go for planning. Likewise, budgets can move between the pre-application and the full application. Like you're not beholden to the numbers that you give us in the pre-application. other than the fact that like all non-motorized projects cap out at $50,000 for standard RTP. And then we have other caps recommended for planning and for the cost increases. You know, we have those pieces, but we've had projects that come in the pre-application round that had, say, like a $35,000 budget. And we're like, did you account for planning and permitting? And they're like, oh no, we didn't. And actually we need a wetlands delineation. So like, we're like, go get that estimated and like add that to your budget to make sure your budget is holistic and actually encompasses all the costs you need. Or we might review projects to say, hey, you didn't budget for an archaeological resource assessment. We really think you're going to need one. So just add that to your budget now. So we will provide some feedback, but also like as applicants, if things are changing, you know, if you're like, right now, we're just at the guess phase for numbers. Like there's no way I'm going to get estimates at this point for other things. Like you can then put that in your full application. It's always best to try to get it as early on because then we can provide you feedback with your descriptions. But things can change, like work plan can shuffle, you can add and remove components. The biggest thing between the pre-application and the full application is it substantively must be the same project. And I say that just because we have people who are like, well, we were going to do a bridge over here, but now we've decided we want to do culvert work and a bench and a trailhead over there. We're like, that's not the same project. Like that's just substantively not the same project. So it substantively has to be the same.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. What other questions do you all have? All right, Alan.
So Alan Hammersmith, I'm a trail chief, one of the trail chiefs for Catamount Trail Association, here for a section of trail in the Mad River Valley. We have a couple bridges on our section of the Catamount Trail that are failing, almost failed. One bridge is significant. One is just a 14-foot section where it's just collapsed. And so I guess because it crosses streams, and I saw in the pre-application guide that, you need to work with DEC engineers to account for peak stream flow and everything. But if we're replacing an existing bridge, is there any difference in, replacing an existing structure versus creating a new structure?
From our recommendation standpoint, no. And that is because like our goal with like any replacement work is always to build back better. This recommendation has come out of the last 2 years of the flooding in 23 and 24, where we've seen existing infrastructure that's been there for years wash away. And then we've also seen infrastructure that maybe had consultation from DEC about like how big should this be, and that has had a better track record of lasting. And so even though you had a bridge there, you want to have a bridge again, we do strongly recommend reaching out to those DEC river engineers to get their expertise involved, because the last thing we want for you all as a recipient is to say, well, we just replaced what we had, and then for us to unfortunately have another flooding event in next summer or in the winter, and then that brand new bridge wash away. We want to help invest in something that's really going to last for your trails and your community, which is why we have that recommendation, just because we've seen that as a track record through our funding. Does that answer your question, Alan?
That does. It's a very good answer. I mean, makes it sound like, well, it failed once. Why replace it with the existing thing that already failed? So.
Yeah, well, and the thing is it could be like, okay, it's just the the decking and the structure. Wood has a shelf life, right?
Yep.
Like it has a point where it is there. And if the DEC river specialists say, yep, it was fine, it was a great size, then you have that information to go forward and be like, that's what we need. But we have also seen people be like, we were just gonna do like a little 10-foot bridge, and then it turns into like a 26-foot, 8-foot wide bridge. And then the money's wrong. Like that's the piece, is like once they start to really go through that like permitting process, and we're like, if you start with that question of like, how big does it need to be, then everything is right sized for what your end product will be, versus like getting partway through the grant, partway through the permitting process and realizing, oh, like actually when we went for, stream alteration permits, we need to change it. And now we can't afford to do what we thought we were going to.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. other questions? Kate?
Yeah, I have some questions from my town clerk / treasurer about the reimbursement process. Just making sure they feel comfortable with it on their end. And just kind of a question about, and I know some of this is in your documentation, but how to submit, when to submit, and how long it takes for a town to be reimbursed.
Great questions. And I just dropped a link in the chat to our grant management page for everybody. Like, this is the, like, if you receive a grant, we will point you to this resource a lot of like, what does the process look like? Where are the forms? What is, so there's a lot of stuff here, but I'm happy to answer all these questions verbally. And so I'm probably only going to remember a couple of them. So please catch me back up when I forget all the pieces. But one of the questions I heard was, how frequently can we submit? And FPR's general rule of thumb is that you can ask for reimbursement for our grants as frequently as every 3 months. We don't have like deadlines of like, well, you have the January to March window and then the you know, May. Nope. We don't put months on it that way. It's as frequently as every 3 months. So whenever your previous reimbursement is 3 months from that date is when you can get the next one. And so that said, like, if there is a significant unforeseen circumstance or a significant one-time expense, like, we will occasionally waive that 3-month requirement as a piece, but that's evaluated on a case-by-case basis. And just to give you like a couple examples of the past of like the rare, it is a rare exception when we do waive it, is that like, we had a flood impacted community who had just put a major investment in, and they're like, for cash flow, we need the money because we've got to like put it back into the community to recover from the flood. Even though like 2 weeks before the floods, they had just done another reimbursement. We're like, absolutely, you need the cash flow for the flood situation. Like, by all means, we're happy to help as much as we can. We've had other situations where like the whole project is, mostly in other grant programs where they'll have like, we're paying $200,000 for a bridge and we had to put down the down payment on it. And we're like, doesn't matter when your last one was. We know that's a big chunk of change. Like, you can file that's a great one-time high cost expense to be able to request reimbursement for. But on the whole, it's every 3 months. You can also wait till the very end. We do not require every 3 months. So like, we also have some grantees where like the only reimbursement request we get from them is when it's all done.
Okay. And does it, so if the project starting time is July 13th, then that first request would be 3 months after that time, or would be sooner?
You could do it sooner. Like, remember, for RTP, is anything before that date is only available as match.
Right.
Generally, so you don't have reimbursable expenses out of the gate. And so knowing that it's July, if we were saying, well, you know, we actually did a ton of work in July and August, and it's at the end of August that the first one's in, we don't hold it 3 months from the start date. It's just sort of from whenever you start.
Okay,
it's 3 months in to be able to do that. And within that frequency, your match needs to track with your reimbursement amounts. So like, at no point can RTP have reimbursed all the costs. You're like, the match will come later. At no point is that allowed. At any point, we have to be at least at that 80% RTP, 20% match documentation.
Yep.
So that was only how often. I did not get to the other 2 questions that you had as with that. I've gotten sidetracked.
How do you submit it, and then how long does it take to?
All right. How do you submit it, and how long does it take? So with a reimbursement request, we have a form that is available. It's on that grant management website page. It's actually an Excel spreadsheet, and there are 2 tabs to it. One is like a budget summary, and one is like a more detailed expense breakdown. And the budget summary can actually function as an invoice. We even have it set up so it meets all the state's invoices requirements. And so we need that document. We will also need documentation of all the expenses. This is federal dollars usually tied to this. So like if you had an invoice from a contractor, we need a copy of that. If it is staff time, you know, we have some provisions for how that gets documented, volunteer time, donations, you know, we went and put it on the credit card, you need a receipt. So you need that financial documentation to go along with it. And then the third component with every reimbursement is that we need a progress report. So that is one of the questions, like how often is the reporting requirement? And generally that's triggered by how often you ask for money. And so every time you ask for a reimbursement, you need to submit a progress report that goes with that. So again, if you're submitting them on an annual basis, we'll hear from you once a year. Generally, if we're submitting them at the end of the grant, we might just hear from you at the very end as that piece. But every time, those are the three pieces to do it. And part of it is we know that that's a lot of work to put together, which is part of the cadence of that 3 months. The other part of that cadence of 3 months is that there is a lot of work downstream. So you get those documents together, you email them to us at the grants team. We generally turn them around as quickly as we can. You don't have to ever, we're getting like well ahead, and you'll hear this later, but like they don't have to be perfect. We're, you know, just like the application phases, if we're missing something, we'll reach out, we'll let you know. If we have questions, we'll let people know. But then we submit it to our business office, their grants team. It goes like, there's a couple of state steps. And so we often recommend, and then depending on if it goes to the postal service or to direct deposit, influence the timeline. So I say that to know that there is variation. You can do an ACH transfer to basically get direct deposit, which speeds up the rate a bit. But we often recommend folks plan for 4 to 6 weeks from like, you give us a complete package to like, that's the money in the bank. And then that includes planning for like it to go through the US Postal Service and all of those different steps along the way.
Thanks. That's
Yeah,
really
you're welcome.
helpful.
Yeah. And one of the questions we didn't get to then with the reimbursement question, we fielded this question before, is people will ask us like, well, then how much should I ask for RTP? And for us, we don't have an answer for that. Like, this is our process, and like your nonprofit, your town, your community's cash flow is different for everyone. And generally when you're like, oh no, it's expensive, is not for us a reason that we often trip that 3 months threshold. That's not a difference that we usually consider, because we want you to plan for that. So like if your community is like, yes, based on our project cadence, like based on what we're expecting when the expenses to hit the book, this is going to match your cash flow, this is going to be fine, then we're like, great, you are the experts of your own communities that way. And also that piece is like, we've had sometimes we're like, oh, did I actually want to go for a $50,000 project? Or like, is this the year that like we scale it back and think about a $30,000 project? Because that just feels more comfortable for us in our cash flow needs. So that is something that we recommend folks consider during this planning stage, is just like those pieces of it.
That's really great. And yeah, that was one thing an email I had exchanged in conversation was, okay, is this quantity something that you think the town could float, knowing that there's going to be a reimbursement? And you know, that's why I'm here, is they said, yes, I think we could float that. So okay, I'll keep going. But yeah. One kind of question to follow that up with is, these are all federal dollars, correct, that you do not currently have, right?
Yes.
So, okay, got it.
But the way it works for all of us, like with RTP right now, is that we get our pledged Vermont amount. Before we issue grant agreements, we submit like an authorization request to Federal Highway, where they basically pre-approve us spending the dollars. And it goes into an agreement. That's actually like, it's on the website of like the submit to Federal Highway for authorization. It's in there as part of our timeline before we issue grant agreements. And so once a grant agreement is issued, like we are set, we are ready to go on that. And for the way the funding flows, like if like you all, as whoever the grantee is, actually I should say, whoever the grantee is the one who incurs the costs. They are the ones who submit to Forest Parks and Recreation for reimbursement. We pay those costs, and then we go to the feds to ask reimbursement down the road later. So like your reimbursement timeline is not tied to our reimbursement timeline. So it's not contingent on the federal turnaround. And that's just our process.
Okay, thank you. That's really
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, but we will not issue any awards without like that authorization from Federal Highway that says you're approved to spend this money on these projects.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Yeah. What other questions do folks have? Jennifer.
Thank you. My first question, I hope, is simple, and that is for this pre-application, it didn't seem like there was any need or requirement for letters of support.
Nope.
Okay.
Not yet. That is for the
Right.
full application, because at this phase, we're assessing for readiness, feasibility, and eligibility. Like
Right.
that's where we're at with this, is like catching those things.
Right.
And to provide feedback. Letters of support will be an option during the full application. So if you're already starting to work that way, you're getting ahead. You'll have what it is that you need
Wonderful.
there as letters of support from the community. Likewise, we have funded partnerships in the past, like or a coalition where like one entity is the grantee, but they are going to work with somebody else. So the town is applying, but the nonprofit is like a key partner in this project. In which case, like there's also a different space in the full application to submit a letter of commitment, which is different from the letter of support. Like letters of support, and we will go through all of this in detail if you are selected to move to the full application round. We'll have a whole nother webinar about like those materials and what it means, but the letter of support are like from your community, like why is this project important and the value of it. The letters of commitment say like, they said I'm going to help, I agree, I'm going to help. It's a different type of pieces versus like I voluntold is that, you know, like I'm the town and I voluntold my nonprofit friends that they're going to participate. We're like, we would like to make sure that they know that they're voluntold for this role. So that they are on board and they agree and they're supportive and everybody's on board. So those are two different options, but not needed for the pre-application phase because it's not what we're looking for at this moment.
Great. My second question is if Green Mountain Conservancy were to submit an application for the standard track, one of the things we actually, the piece of land, the 200 acres that's Old Oaks Headwaters Preserve, is essentially landlocked, and we have a right-of-way that was granted and recorded in the town, and we have permission in this right-of-way to create a small parking area and trail into our property. And so we would love to include that in the application because we need to get gravel and we need kiosk and signage. And I'm just wondering if that seems like it would fit, even though it's a second, it's on somebody else's land, but we have the right of way to do that.
Yeah, if you have a right of way, that is like you have legal rights to this opportunity that way. Like you have that component there. And so I'm gonna share just this part of like what do we get at with the pre-application. This is the pre-application form that everybody has to fill out. If you remember, everybody has 3 documents that they have to do. They have to do the pre-application form, a work plan, and a budget. And then if you have a construction or maintenance project, there are additional materials that you need for the pre-application. But in the pre-application, we're just going to ask you about the status of what, like, do you own the land or have rights to the land everywhere that you're working for? If not, do you already have signed landowner permission, whether that is like you have the documentation or you don't have it yet? We're just checking in on status. If you don't have it yet, we're going to ask you about your plan to get it and what types of landowner permission you will be looking for or needed. and if you already have it, if you need to secure it, or it doesn't apply. So this is what we're checking for the pre-application. When we get to the full application phase, you are required to submit all documentations as related to landowners. So, in this case, Jennifer, like if you have land that you own, you'll attest to that. But also there'll be a space to like upload easements and right-of-way documents. And then you can say, so like functionally you have a legal interest in all the spaces which you're doing your work. But if you actually realize like, we actually need more than our right-of-way footprint to do this parking lot. We need more than that. That is the space where you would work with that landowner to specifically get permission for the project. And we have a landowner permission form on our website. We actually have two of them. One is for private landowners. Which gives, it's a document that expresses permission for your entity to do this specific scope of work. And it's signed and dated and gives like an end date on there. So we have that, but we also do have, if there are any groups who are either on this call or will be watching the recording later, a separate class 4 road permission form, or legal trails. So that if you're like a nonprofit and you're doing work on a class 4 road, if that's what you're proposing, you can get permission from the town then to do that work. So it's a separate form just because it's a little different there.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Other questions? Pete.
So I've been working on the map, and I really love your tutorial. I very much appreciate that tool and learning how to use it. That being said, trying to stack the functions, I'm also, utilizing this tool as something that I can share with folks for this project. But I want to clarify about not making it too busy and including too much information that's not relevant. So, if I am just seeking funding for this program to cover one, or even just for the surfacing material for one trail, whereas, the match is the other components. Is it okay to, make that one thing a specific, color that's well defined and easy to view, but also have that within the larger picture of other things, or does that get too confusing?
So I heard a couple of things in there with the map, and I think we need to tease them apart. If it is part of the RTP project, so whether that is RTP funded or match funded, it should all be on the map very clearly. So you couldn't just say like, oh, I promise there's other gravel work and it's my match. Like it all comes together from our perspective, because like if it's RTP funded or RTP match, we need to run it through on our end, historic review all together to get our historic letters for Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. Like we've got to do that. So like we need all the work to be on there. If you're like, this is phase 1, and then there's phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, I would really focus your map on the phase 1. I think you can, if you have other existing documents about those future phases, that mostly you just want the review committee to know at some point of things that you're planning or how this trail fits into your bigger trail network. You can submit those as like additional materials, but they're not what we're considering as like the project map, which is truly like what is the RTP project focused on.
Okay, perfect. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and we've also had groups before who are like, do we have to use your map system? Absolutely not. If you have access to another mapping system that you can get all of the things that are on the map checklist, go for it, have fun. Like, we just offer this as an opportunity because, like, if you're doing, say, like a Google Earth picture that you're just gonna like plop notes on, oftentimes like that doesn't show us where the landowner boundaries are. Like, that doesn't show us all of the detail that's generally needed. And so we offer this tool as an opportunity to be able to get to everything. But if you have other pieces, other documents, that can be something that you could consider submitting down the road, like in the full application, if you want. We'll talk about that for folks who get to the full application phase of like, what do you want to submit? Because sometimes like more is not always more in the full application phase. So we do try to provide some support and training around that when we get there. But for now, I would say focus your maps just on the project that's being funded or being proposed for funding.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. What other questions? This is your time. We're here for the next 10 minutes for whatever questions you have remaining. Jennifer.
Thank you. I'm thinking about this little parking area. It has been used previously. It's former Marlborough College land, now owned by Potashell Inc. And they created this area and they were like, sure, you can use part of it. So we have this right of way for a small parking area and the trail. I think we could hire a contractor and the gravel could be placed there. And but I'm wondering about in this pre-app, what would be better to say about engineering, if you will. When I look at it, I think, well, that doesn't actually need a lot of engineering. It's flat. It seems ready to go. Let's just put some gravel down.
I am not the expert in that position to be able to provide advice for you on this. I would recommend that you talk, if you have other folks you're working with, to talk to them to see, like, do they have expertise? Do you have a partner that you can leverage to say, have you done similar projects? What kind of engineering costs did you need? You can ask other folks that way. You can also, one of the big pieces that I recommend though is within the Permit Navigator report. So that is the tool from the Department of Environmental Conservation that is required for all construction maintenance projects. And it's an online tool where you put in your project information, and then at the very end, it will spit out a list of potential permits that you need. I would recommend following, it's not the engineering side of things for those costs, but they will weigh in on permit side and like if there is a concern there. Because I know sometimes with parking lots, they're like, yeah, you could just put gravel there. And the other times they're like, ooh, you are like the size of this parking lot, other things like you're going to start to trip stormwater regulations. You're going to start to like there are wetlands around there. There's something else that you need to plan for design for. And so that could be a good first step to say like, okay, I've put in all my information about Permit Navigator. Next step is to follow up with those contacts and just to say, because it's an internet tool, right? Like it can only give you so much. At the very end, it spits out a list of the maybes. And it is your responsibility to then follow up with all those maybes to say like, are they actually maybes, or like once a specialist reviews like in granular detail your project, is that applicable or not anymore? So that would be, I think, a good starting point is to like leverage that tool from there to if you're part of a committee, a group, to reach out for it and see, or even like if you have the capacity to reach out to an engineer who is to say like, do you think that we would, like this is the scope of project that needs that type of work, and if so, like ballpark cost.
Yes.
So not to do like a full-on bid package, like please don't do that yet, but like to get an idea of something that's required.
Perfect. One thing that I vaguely remember when I first looked at this is that if there are two parcels of land, so we have the right of way, then I look at something other than the Permit Navigator. Is that the case?
Yes, if you want it to be considered holistically, there is a the project review sheet, which is a different tool that it goes like you fill it out, then you submit it, and then instead of like the computer giving you those, there is like a human being specialist who reviews it, who will curate the list for you at the very end. And so that actually has been through that review. So yes, if it's truly like a multi-parcel project, you can do that. Generally though, they need at least a month's lead time to turn that around. So as that piece is, and like for the full application, we would need that. Is that turned around piece. So if you do think you'll need that route, you can go down that way. But that's truly for like a whole project that does that. We have had applicants in the past that like, I mean, it's on 2 parcels, but it's fundamentally like this part and that part, and they're different work. Like this is for like trail tread maintenance and water bars and ditching, and this is for parking lots, which is just like a fundamentally different scope of work. Like they're all part of the same project, but they're not really connected. In which case we have had some applicants in the past do permit navigator for the one spot, permit navigator for the other spot. We have had that in the past because it's just, in many ways, it's really 2 different sub projects.
Right.
So it just depends on the scope. But if you're like, it's the trailhead that then leads into the trail, then you're really impacting the same area, and it would be that project review sheet.
Right. And for the pre-app, it doesn't sound like I would have time to do the project review sheet.
No, you'll give us what you got as best you can. So if you submitted the project review sheet, we would like that application in and to know when you've submitted it, when you're expecting to hear back, because we are getting close on that deadline here. But then for the full application, like you will need it by that deadline.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. With 4 minutes remaining, what final questions do you all have for today? And none is a valid answer. None is a valid answer at this point. So we have had a lot of time today. As we shared, this session was recorded. We will be posting it online. We'll send it out afterwards. But this is not the end. We are going to be hosting another office hours in about a week and a half. There will be another opportunity for folks to come on and ask questions in real time. That one is shortly before the application deadline, just because we know there's usually a crux of questions of like, wait a second, what do you put in this box? And so we're happy to answer those questions, but also if you're still in the more conceptual stage of planning that, we'll answer those too. Whatever questions you have as of that window. So that I believe is on November 18th in the afternoon. The link to register is available on our website. If you're also on our listserv, there will be a reminder that goes out to be able to sign up and register for that. So with that, we're happy to stay if there's any last minute bubble up questions, but if you feel satisfied and you've gotten what you need from today, thank you all so much for being here. You're also welcome to always email us at our shared inbox. That's the ANR.FPR recreationgrants@vermont.gov. And there is a team of 3 of us who respond to inquiries in that inbox. So happy to continue answering questions that way as well. So otherwise, thank you all so much for being here and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank
Thank you.
you.